On behalf of the family, I'd like to, for all the friends and neighbors and everyone that's here, just their appreciation from not only the last few days, but the last weeks and years, actually. And it's mentioned often, and certainly doesn't go unappreciated, and as well as today. You know, we gather at a time like this, and it's kind of a bittersweet thing. And we, in one sense, say goodbye to someone, and there's another sense in which it's a beginning of a new era. And we're going to talk a little bit about that before we finish up today. But so as to recognize each one of the family, I want to read, and I'm only going to read in part, the obituary. I thought the obituary, when I first seen it, I thought, well, that is the greatest outline of someone's life, maybe that I've seen. It was real good. So whoever was behind that, and I'm sure there were multiple, did a great job. And I'm going to just read portions of it at different times, and you'll understand more when we get a little further into this time. It says, Paul Edwin Luyster, 97 of Barnesville, passed away Saturday, April 30th, 2023, at his home. He was born August 25th, 1925 in Piedmont, Ohio, to late Thomas Edwin and Dora Elizabeth Murphy Luyster. He was a lifetime member of the Church of Christ at Fairview and served as a deacon at that place. In addition to his parents, Paul was preceded to death by his wife of 72 years. We're going to talk about that some today because that to him was paramount. Whom he married on August 5th of 1947, Esther Luyster, who passed away October 18th of 2018. He and Esther took many vacations together and enjoyed his retirement gardening and making crafts. Paul was also preceded to death by his brothers Gail and Doris Luyster, Ray Luyster, Howard Luyster, and Dale Luyster. He's survived by his daughter, Linda C. and Donna Mayberry of Barnesville. Grandchildren, Mark and Lori Mayberry of Cambridge, and Donna and Scott Berger of Salesville. Two great-grandchildren, Chad and Kim Berger and Eric Berger. Four great-grandchildren, Parker, Palmer, Fraley, and Lang, sisters-in-law, Ellen Luyster and Betty Eddy, and several nieces and nephews. I'm going to refer back to this, a few times here this morning. But when you think about him, his life, in every aspect of his life, it seemed that he stood out. And when you look at whether it was in the military, in his married life, his working life, and his retirement life, he kind of excelled in each one of those in his own way, and that was great. And when I say it's a bittersweet day, the family and friends and the earth has lost a good man. But we are hopeful and confident that heaven has gained a good man, and we have to look at it. And there's a sense in which he lived his life for this day, and anyone that is a Christian would understand that. I want to go back into the obituary, and I'm going to skip down a little bit. I want to go to the military first. I want to give his married life the priority over the military. And I'd say if he wanted someone to stand here and talk about somebody, he would give Esther her due and then some, because of the relationship they had. It was an example to anyone that knew them, because they had just a special bond between each other. Every time you've seen them together, it was hardly ever you hear the name Paul without hearing the name Esther. It was always Paul and Esther, Paul and Esther. And everyone was very respectful. But you hear this and that about different people. I don't think I've ever heard anything negative about either one of them in my life. And that's very complimentary. And when you think about the life they had together, it was just beyond. When it talks about the vacations they took, then he would talk about they loved the mountains, so Linda would go with them at times and she wasn't quite as excited maybe as they were, because she didn't like that. And I'm sure she worried about, are you too close to the edge? I could hear her say that. They went places that I never heard of. And we talked with them some, Don and I, and we have went places because of our conversations with them that were very nice. Some of them we went twice. Never knew they existed until we talked to them. And when you talk about somebody documenting their life, you know, we have recordings now and things where you can record every moment. But if you look at how they documented their life, it is just exceptional. We would be out at their home and maybe visiting, and Linda would say, wait a minute, that's in this album. She would get in this stack of albums and dig out the right one for whatever that it was that you were talking about, because they had the information. So it was somewhat amazing. When people start a family, sometimes with the first child, I know I speak for our daughter, they document every move. By the time you get, you know, they never stop documenting. And if you look at this stuff back here, it is exceptional. It's exceptional. It's the Paul and Esther Museum, in a sense. And they'll always have that. And that really meant a lot to the rest of the family, to Linda and the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren. It's just amazing when you think about how they did that. And I'm going to say something that seems maybe a little bit different. Paul lived a good full life. He was always somewhat excited about life, and everything that was in front of him, he just gave it his all. If there was an issue to be resolved, construction-wise or anything around the church building or whatever, he was on it. And he's seen it through, and that's just the way it was. But there's a sense in which October the 18th of 2018, there was a void in his life that has not been fulfilled until April the 30th of this year. You could talk with him and he would get off the subject of maybe he and Esther for a moment, but when you sat in their house, everything reminded you of their spatial skills and their crafts and whatever they had done together. Linda and some other family members and friends put themselves out somewhat to, you know, make sure that he stayed in that museum. I'll call it a museum because it was for them. And she said, well, why don't you come out and live with Dawn and I? Off the page. He wasn't interested in that. He wouldn't leave. So it put an extra burden on, you know, Linda and Dawn and Dawn and, you know, all the family you had to come back. You go to his house, that's where he was going to be, that was his intention. And when I say that on October the 18th, 2018, there was a void that could never be fulfilled, he could not get past that day. For just a short time, he could talk about something else and be in South. But as soon as that thought came back, he just dropped his head, and you could just tell that in the inside he was just hurt. But our prayer is that now they're together. And we'll leave that there. I'm going to read another part of the obituary. When it talks about him being a veteran of the United States Army, where he served during World War II, he was a member of the Cambridge Military Order for Park. Paul served as a PFC in the U.S. Army during World War II with Company L, the 19th Regiment, 24th Infantry Division, and took part in the Battle of Leyte and in the Philippines, as well as in the Battle of Mindanao, Luzon, Mindoro, and New Guinea. He was awarded the Purple Heart in the Philippines Liberation Medal, World War II Victor Medal, 3 Bronze Stars, Combat Infantry Badge, Asiatic Pacific Theater Ribbon, and was a sharpshooter. I talked with Linda a little bit the other day, and I could hear Dawn in the background said, well, one thing that needs to be mentioned is that he turned 18 on the Pacific Ocean on his way to war. And to put it mildly, I'd say he was scared beyond, as was every other. What would you think, 17-year-old, on your way to war? There were over 407,000 casualties of American soldiers in World War II. Now, that had already been going on a little while when he was called to duty. It's called a special generation, just the greatest. Actually, it's called the Greatest Generation by Tom Brokaw, wrote some books back in 1998, and he referred to those individuals as the greatest generation. And when you think about we being in here speaking English as opposed to Japanese or German, the greatest generation, thanks to those fellows that stood up to the need at that particular time. It was a difficult time. The Depression started in the late 1920s, 1929 to 1939. He lived through most of that. Okay, he lived through all of it, but probably without realization as a young boy that he was in the teens in 1939. And right after that, and the challenges, and you've talked to your grandparents or whomever about the Depression, and right after that, and then you go to war. Challenging time, but they stood up to the test. I was looking through some of the pictures and things back there. And there's a picture of Esther that says that he carried that in his helmet all the time that he was gone. As Linda said, they wrote back and forth. And then he wrote under that picture that thankful to God and to Esther that he made that life. If you talk to him about the war, he had some stories that would probably hard for him to repeat. When he first came back, it was a most challenging thing. And he said there was an elder in the church over at Fairview that kind of got him through all that challenge. We see people come back in this day and age and they call it PTSD, and I don't know that they ever heard of that then, although that was the same thing. And he had a very challenging time. I looked at the date that he was wounded, and it was June of 45. The war ended in September of 45. And so toward the end, that he had seen, and he could tell you about some of the things that he had experienced. And I remember him telling me about the first confrontation that he hesitated. And he said there was someone beside of him that did what they had to do, or he said he probably wouldn't be here. So after that, you had to understand that you either do what you have to do, or it's going to be you. And very few of us have ever faced with a situation like that, but he was multiple times. He said they always carried a backpack, and when they would be out, and you had a little shovel on it, and it's for various purposes. But whenever he took that shovel off his backpack, it had stopped a bullet. And he didn't even realize. He said he tried to send that shovel home. They're recording everything, but he said it must have got lost in shuffle. It never did get. So someone intercepted that along the way somewhere. He was very proud to have served his nation. He met General MacArthur on 2 occasions. Actually got to shake his hand. That's a 5-star general that was in charge of everything over in that area, and very exceptional. And in fact, I believe that he said on one occasion that MacArthur said, "How long have you been out here, soldier?" Or what's his name? And of course he told him, and he said, "How long have you been out here?" He said, and he gave him a time limit, and they used to try to switch him out as possible. Oh, and it had been well beyond the period of time they should have been. And he said, "I'll do something about that." And he said, "I'll tell you." He said he actually kept his word, and he said the next couple of days he had the new reliefs out there. He had foot problems the rest of his life because of happening to be in swampy areas for extended periods of time without being able to bathe and what have you. And he could tell you some interesting stories, and I suppose there's some light in some of it. But he said they had went through this one city that they had, forced everyone out, and he said there was a monkey tied to the porch that someone had left real quick and left this monkey. So, of course, those guys, 18-year-olds, what are you going to do? Take the monkey with you. And that's exactly what they did. And the monkey pestered the cook's dog so much that the cook said, either you keep a hold of the monkey or he was going to do the monkey in. So, but he could tell you some of those stories. I relate one story of when he was just him and I suppose some of his brothers when he was young, and boys being boys, said he had a pet raccoon. And he said, a raccoon seems to wash everything before they eat it. They talk about other reasons for that, and I think that's been debunked. But whatever. And he said, boys being boys, they gave this monkey a stogie. And it's in front of the water pot. And of course, he said it just uses its front paws like hands. Smell that stogie, put it down in the water and wash it. Bring it back up, back down and wash it. And whenever he would tell that tale, and I'm sure the raccoon looked off to the side, but when Paul would tell that tale, he would tell it like this. Like that raccoon's just looking off to the side as he's trying to wash that stogie. And I don't think he ever got it cleaned up. We know why. His work life was amazing, and he worked for different dairies. And you can see in the obituary some of the ones he worked for. And he got awards for the different products that he would make. And that was great because it was on a state level that they had these competitions. And he would be awarded, and he was real good at it. But one thing he told me, separate from being in the dairy, that he had a milk route for a while. And you see these people set these 10-gallon milk cans on their porch now in this day and age. And that milk can weighs about 8 pounds. You put 10-gallon milk in it, you add 80. So that's 88 pounds. He said, people said, well, you can't do that. You're not big enough. I believe he did that for 6 or 8 years, if I recall right. And they didn't have a nice low bed. They put that bed up over top the wheels. And then if they want 2 layers up there, once you get it up in there, then you have to shuffle to the next level. So, tough. He was like a piece of bristle. I don't know how else to say that. He had to be very tough to do that. Now to the last part. I had opportunity to speak, and I still just do that on a periodic basis. And I had opportunity to speak at Fairview, and it was in 2009. And in fact, it was in April of 2009, and I had a lesson that had to do with salvation and what have you. And that's when he came to me after the service, and he said, I want you to use that lesson at my funeral. Now, that about knocks you over when someone says that to you. And so I made a note, and always kept that. And I looked that lesson up, and it'd be very brief. Now, if it was up to him, he would want me to be up here saying, and he would be very emphatic about that. But I'm going to be easier so that you don't think I'm the bad guy. But at the same time, it's a very serious time. And there's a verse of scripture in the book of Ecclesiastes that said, it's better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting. Does that make sense to you? When you stop and think about that, does that make sense? Wouldn't you rather go out to eat someplace, a nice place, than be in here? But the finish of that verse says, for that is the end of all men. We have to realize that this is the end of all men. And the next time it may be me or you. That's the end on this life. But there's another sense in which it's a beginning. And the living will lay it to his heart. When's the last time you thought about, these times of things we think about our own vulnerability? That's why it's better, because it will make us understand our true purpose in life when we think about those things. One other verse, and that is in Matthew chapter 11, in the latter part of it. It says, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. This may be the end of one stage, okay? But it is absolutely the beginning of man's purpose in life. He looked forward to it. Why? Because he was ready. If the family could do anything, if he's looking down, if the family would do anything that would cause him to smile as he looked down, it would be serve the Lord faithfully. That's man's purpose in life. Solomon tried in every avenue to find peace. And the last words in Ecclesiastes was, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man. It's not saying put anything else in your life off. Priorities. Priorities. It's about priorities. And so is Paul to look down and smile. He would want everyone in this room, family, everyone, friends, neighbors, get your priorities right. Because the next time it's going to be one of us, but it could be me. Bow with me, please. Our God and Father in heaven, we are thankful for this day that you've blessed us with. We are saddened by the loss of our friend and good man, Paul Luyster. But at the same time, we rejoice in knowing that your Son has died for the sins of mankind and that he has lived his life to prepare for this time. Help us, Father, that we might emulate that in our own lives, that we might prepare ourselves for the day that we depart from this earth, and pray that we would be welcomed into that eternal joy of the soul. Be with the family and help them that they look to you for the strength and solace that they need to continue on. Help us as friends and neighbors that we might encourage them to that end. Is our prayer through Christ. Amen.